Welcome to the Queens of the Damned podcast. So we are continuing this week with our true crime episodes, I guess, and we're going to do Farmhouse Murders this week. And we have a special guest.
His name is Aaron. He's one of my friends, and the reason we decided to do this episode was because I asked him what his favorite true crime story was, and when he told me what it was, I'd never heard of it before, and I thought it was one of the most outrageous things that I'd ever heard. So then it kind of got us to thinking about there's a lot of bad things that happen to people who live in rural places.
In the middle of nowhere.
So, I don't know. I thought we could just kind of explore that theme, and I think we're going to be doing this in two parts because it's going to be quite a hefty episode. So, Aaron and I are both going to share our murders on the first part. That episode will be released Friday. And then on the second part, Rachel will share her murder, and Miranda is going to lead a discussion on Gillian Flynn's book, Dark Places, which is a fiction book, but it centers around a farmhouse murder. So
follow us on everything. Rate, review, subscribe on iTunes. It's the best way to support us. You can follow us on Google Play, on SoundCloud, subscribe to us on YouTube. We are on Twitter and Facebook at QOTD Podcast, and WordPress at queensofthedamnedpodcast.wordpress.com. I think that's everything. Am I missing?
So.
Oh, we're on Tumblr now, too. Yeah, we are now on Tumblr. I believe it's just QOTD Podcast. So follow us on Tumblr, too, and that should be everything.
That should be everything.
We are everywhere.
Okay, so I guess, gosh, this is going to be really happy. It's always so happy when we do true crime. Rachel actually recommended this murder to me. It's the Villisca Ax Murders. I hope I'm saying that right. It's an unsolved murder that took place in 1912, which was the year that the Titanic sank, too. So, good stuff happened in that year. I don't know. Yeah. I'm on a lot of cold medicine. Like, half of us are sick, so I have no idea what I'm saying. Anyway, I actually sourced some things when I did notes. I kind of fell down the rabbit hole with this thing because there's so many theories and people have really strong feelings about this murder. And I'll tell you why in a bit. But there's two major sources I used. One is iowacoldcases.org, which is a great website. You should definitely check it out if you're into true crime. It lists all the cold cases in Iowa, especially really famous ones, and it just kind of breaks them down in a really orderly way. So if you're just looking something up, it's a good place to start. And my second source is, I'm going to murder his name, but it's Nick Kowalczyk. Blood, Gore, Tourism, the axe murderer who saved a small town. And it's all about how this murder kept Villisca alive financially, and kind of how bitter some people are about that because it's a little weird. So kind of interspersed with my notes about how the murder happened, I think he's a professor at some university. Or his comments about how he felt when he went to this town to interview the owner of the museum and the townspeople and stuff like that. So it's a really interesting perspective. So the Villisca God, this is gonna be great. The Villisca Ax Murders are one of the most popular Iowa murders, if not the most popular Iowa murders. 789,000 search results for Villisca Ax Murder on Google as of 5 years ago. And it's basically just this family who went home after church one night and were never seen again alive. So Joe and Sarah Moore, their children, Herman, who was 11, Catherine, who was 10, Boyd, who was 7, and Paul, who was 5. And then 2 children who were just staying the night with them after church from the Stillinger family. And those were sisters, Lena and Ina, 12 and 8 years old. So 8 victims in all. Basically, here's what happened. The night of Sunday, June 9th and Monday, June 10th, 1912, they don't know exactly when the guy came into the house, but it was sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. So the family attended a Children's Day service that evening and ended up taking the 6 children back to their home around 9:30 p.m. The next morning at 7:30, the neighbor lady, Mary Peckham, became concerned that the Moore house seemed quiet and deserted, which, I'm sorry, but at 7:30 a.m., I'm going to be sleeping. I don't know about you. That's
Well, I think, like, that, and I mean, in a rural town, like,
people should have been up doing their chores and stuff.
Yeah, like, you would be up and, like, shopping or something. Like, you'd be out and about.
Yeah, that's true. But, I mean, just thinking about it from this time, it's kind of funny that, like, what would happen if your neighbor lady was like, I'm so concerned that you're not awake and doing stuff at 7:30. So then she calls the husband's brother, Ross, and he comes to knock on the door around 8, and, of course, nobody answers. When he goes in, just to the downstairs part of the house, he sees 2 figures covered with a sheet in the back bedroom and also blood on the bedstead. So those are the Stillinger sisters, Ida and Lena. So Ross, I wrote, Ross lights the fuck out of there and calls the marshal, whose name is Hank Horton, and he provides one of the most chilling quotes in the case. There's somebody murdered in every bed. So,
just wait.
So here's another quote. This is a quote from Nick Kowalczyk. Beside Joe lies Sarah, a woman of 39 with a fragile face and curly brown hair, whose head an undertaker will deem the least pulpy. The murderer had killed them with the blunt end of an axe, striking each person 20 to 30 times on the head and face. He seemed to be swinging so forcefully that marks from the sharp end of the axe were found on the ceiling. This is actually a quote from Nick Kowalczyk's article. He says, today's major social event, which is the murder scene, where eventually 50 to 100 people gawk at the bodies and disturb evidence. This part, like, more than the murders, when I do true crime cases and listen to them, like, even more than the murders is the people fucking up the case. Like, it makes me just cringe every time. So all the neighbors and everybody comes to, like, look at what happened, because this is probably the most interesting thing that's happened to them ever in their lifetimes, and they're touching everything. So Bruce Stillions, a druggist, takes photographs that he hopes the Omaha World Herald will buy. Dr. Howe sees axe marks in the children's room. Horton removes bloody clothing stuck to the Stillinger girls' faces. Someone noticed Sarah Moore's wedding ring still in her finger, decides there's no evidence of robbery. The wife of Ross Moore poses for pictures inside. I'd like to just smack her.
Oh my God.
I know.
Proto selfie.
I know. Oh. A drunk named Bert McCall steals a piece of bone to display at his pool hall, claiming it belonged to Joe Moore. Posses are formed and black people leave town out of fear they'll be lynched. And a few days later, the Stillingers give birth to a stillborn. But by the end of the year, their house catches fire and burns down. So they didn't have a very happy ending to that story at all.
Were they in the house?
No, the Stillingers were at home, but the 2 little girls that were their only 2 children, I think, were killed in the house. So they tried to have another kid, and
it died.
It was stillborn. So the suspects are really interesting. There's some very unique things that were found at the crime scene. The murder weapon was resting against the Stillinger children's bedroom wall, partially cleaned. Next to this was an uncooked slab of bacon. The murderer also had searched dresser drawers for pieces of clothing to cover the mirrors in the house and the glass in the entry doors. On the kitchen table was a plate of uneaten food and a bowl of bloody water. There was a huge religious, political theory, which everyone who was religious in that town believed that the senator had done it because Joe Moore, the husband, was sleeping with his son's wife, and also for financial reasons, something about a rival farm company. I didn't get into it. It was obviously kind of a rat on your neighbor thing. And it also had something to do with the Presbyterian and Methodist church rivalry. It's like an extremely Salem witch trials thing to me. Basically, it was opportunistic to try to peg it on somebody. Plus, I don't think it matches up with the picture of the murder that we get from the crime scene. I don't know what kind of hired assassin is going to, stick around the murder scene and go, rooting through the victim's icebox and leave the bacon next to the murder weapon.
Yeah.
The MO just doesn't seem right. Mm-hmm. Then the second suspect was this Reverend Kelly, who was a very odd duck. He preached in some towns north of Villisca, and he visited the town the weekend of the murders. And he left the day after reportedly telling a fellow train passenger that there were 8 dead souls back in Villisca, Iowa, butchered in their bed while they slept, even though the bodies had not yet been discovered. So that sounds really fishy. 2 months after the murders, Kelly signed a confession saying that God had whispered to him to suffer the children to come unto me. And you can read, I think I'll put up his whole confession. It's really creepy if you want to read it. He's talking about how, like, he followed a shadow to the back door that was telling him to go in, and it was, like, very, it seemed like God was telling him to do it. But he recanted his confession at trial, and his case went to the jury on September 26. The jury deadlocked 11-1 for acquittal. A second jury was immediately impaneled, but acquitted Reverend Kelly in November. No one else has ever been tried for the murders. And some people think the murderer actually just left town by the train because it was very close to the railroad tracks. And I was so mad last week because I was listening to My Favorite Murder, and Karen Kilgariff covered the Axeman of New Orleans. And actually, they think the Axeman of New Orleans did more murders, and he just traveled around the country.
Really?
Yes, because there were some, and Karen covers this a lot better in the show, but he took time to, like, eat and cover mirrors at the crime scenes, and he also always used an axe. So, the blunt end of an axe, not the sharp end. So
He would also leave the axe, wouldn't he?
I think he would leave. I think he would use whatever the axe he would find in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, so that kind of indicated him, but they never caught him. They never knew who he was. So there has been some paranormal incidents after the murders. This house is like kind of a catch-all for paranormal investigators now, and some of them, cool, that's great, and some of them are just completely ridiculous. In 2014, Robert Stephen Larson Jr. arrived with a group of friends as a paranormal investigator, and this is a witness testimony, I believe. From my understanding, he was alone in the northwest bedroom, and the rest of the party was outside. And he called for help on their mobile two-way radios. His companions found him stabbed in the chest, an apparently self-inflicted wound, called 911, and Larson was brought to a nearby hospital before being helicoptered to a bigger hospital in Omaha. Apparently, the incident happened around 12:45 a.m., which is said to be the approximate time that the 1912 murders took place. So make of that what you will.
Fake.
What?
Super fake.
I know, but I mean, it did happen, but like, I don't know. So I have like a whole tourism section because this is the big thing about the house now is you can go stay there. It's $70 each for 6 people a night.
Is it always in packages of 6?
You have to have at least 6 people, I think.
Of course you do.
I would not stick there for any amount of money.
I would stay there, but so this is from Nick Kowalczyk's article. Iowa's a state begging to be visited with plenty of Americana to offer. Hence the world's largest corn stalk, the world's largest strawberry, the world's largest bullhead catfish, the world's largest Swedish coffee saucer, even the world's largest Cheeto, and the Midwest's most gruesome unsolved murder. Now a guest host for ghost hunters who pay hundreds of dollars to bring a sleeping bag and set up on the old hardwood floors. But normal families had lived in this house for 80 years before they made it into a museum. This guy named Darwin bought it in 94. And almost every weekend he makes $400 a night, which works out to an annual total of about $41,600 in a town with a median household income of $26,000.
Wow.
And he does, sorry, but shit. I think he's dead now, but a person took it over after he did, and she makes the same amount of money, because I looked into how much it would be to stay the night, and she kept the same fees. And I think Kowalczyk ends his article saying that the victims are still suffering indignities over 100 years after the murder because of all the looky-loos coming, which, I mean, I don't know. I think it's fine to go look. It's a piece of history, you know, and it's great to be curious about those things, but really, like, making that much money off of it is kind of shitty, I think.
I guess, like, in some sense, it's bad, but also, I don't know. I mean, they'd be dead now anyway.
Of course, yeah. I mean, like, all their family members would, but
No, you're right.
No, you're right.
It's it is what it is, I guess. I mean, it's just human nature.
Oh, yeah, of course, I think. But I don't know. I just think people don't have a lot of awareness of themselves when they go into those situations, and they think it's, like, just a fun thing to do. And, like, they're, like, I think when people die a long time ago, or you think of people, like, over 100 years ago, you don't think of them as people, you know, because they're not exactly the same as we are today. But they're still people. They still had, you know, all the same, like, hopes and fears, and then they wound up horribly murdered, like, so I don't know. The things here, I actually have an example of things that I don't think are okay, and it has to do with some of the paranormal investigation. So, well, some of it's just interesting, and some of it really just kind of irks me. But so the proprietor, as of 2014, can be seen in a video believing that the house has absorbed some sort of evil, and he claims that the various tenants have come and gone during the 80 years. The house wasn't a museum due to sinister paranormal activity, such as like seeing a man with an axe in the house. And he claims that several satanic rituals have been performed in the attic, and voodoo symbols have been left there. I wrote, let's educate him about Satanism and voodoo. Anyway.
How different they are.
And this is what like kind of ticked me off, was that a paranormal team obtained and placed the original axe used in the murders back in the house, and they placed mannequins in the exact spots the bodies were found. And like, I could not finish watching this documentary because the paranormal investigators were like threatening the murderer if he was still in the house with the axe, and like waving it around, and I'm like, are you kidding? Like, the only people that are still in that house maybe are the family who's been murdered, and if I was one of them, I would fuck with them so hard. You know? Yeah. So those are the kinds of things that it's basically just they're doing it for a publicity stunt, and you can't believe these people actually believe that they're going to contact the murderer, because they hopefully have done historical research right before they've gone to this house, and they know that the murderer didn't die in the house, so why the hell would he be there? And they know that he possibly committed other murders, so why is that particular location, you know, more special than others? But there are some interesting things that have happened, where the owner, as of 2012, said that when the first paranormal investigator asked to come, that was the first time I ever seen anything that really bothered me. About the second group, there was a lady with a little girl, just a really small girl, and this little girl kept tugging at her mother to go into the dark room, the one where the children slept. And I thought, that's kind of funny. And so the tours went on a little longer, and with another group, a little boy did the same thing. He was just tugging at his mother to go into the dark room. There was a psychic sitting across from me, and I asked her what's the deal with the little kids. She said, oh, Darwin, they're children, and their minds are open. They see the more children, and they want to go in and play. I couldn't buy that, but then I saw it happen again, and since then I watched the children people bring into the house, lay by the bed, and play peekaboo under the covers with somebody who's not there. I've seen them turn around and tell the air to quit pushing them. I don't know. So, yeah.
I would say don't bring your air.
Yeah, that's kind of something that I thought, you know.
I would not bring a small child somewhere that I thought was haunted. Like, I don't think that's safe or wise.
Yeah, that's
Or just anywhere where there was a murder. Like, why would you bring your children along? Like, hey, let's go do a tour of a murder house.
Yeah.
I don't get that. Like, that's not fun for children.
I might do that.
I guess it depends on the time.
Yeah.
Henry's kind of a weird kid, so I might do that.
Yeah, I don't know. Henry might be able to handle
Yeah, I
it.
think he'd be fine.
Yeah, so that's the Villisca Ax Murders.
And
That
one
was
more
awful.
thing about those is there is a really good documentary that was made a few years ago, which is how I heard about it. I think it's on YouTube, actually, but we'll link to it on the WordPress. We'll link to the YouTube video and the website where you can buy it. It's to support the people who made it. It's really well done, and yeah, that's how I first heard about it. We actually used to carry it at the bookstore that we all used to work at.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Remember we had those like local DVDs?
Oh, there was one of that?
It might still be there. Yeah, it's like a red cover.
Ooh.
Yeah.
It's like with me, isn't it?
Yeah,
Okay,
would you like to share your...
Nikki had asked me what my favorite true crime story was. And first off, I said Jack the Ripper, but everybody says Jack the Ripper. And I responded then with the Bloody Benders. And the Bloody Benders, they were a family in Kansas. I think I'm just going to go ahead and just do the timeline. And just from the start to the beginning to the discovery of what it was they were doing. So some backstory. The Homestead Act of 1862 decreed that people who were willing to work the land for 5 years, pay a registration fee, could get 160 acres to work the land. So in 1870, in Kansas, coming down the Osage Trail, which was the basically what served for the road before the railroads came through, past Independence, but before you get to the town of Cherryvale. Cherryvale is a small town in the area. And in one October day in 1870, 2 men came down the Osage Trail, and no one knows where they came from. They stop at the local trading post, run by Rudolph Bachman and August Hearn, 2 German immigrants. The area has been kind of filled with a lot of German immigrants coming into the area. The 2 men identify themselves as John Bender Sr. and John Bender Jr.
Sounds made up.
It does a bit, doesn't it? They make inquiry about purchasing land. John Sr. buys 160 acres. His son buys a smaller plot adjacent to it. The plot they purchase is kind of straddling the Osage Trail. They go and they purchase housemaking supplies, limestone, bricks for the cellar, wood for the walls, and bring in this. It may or may not be important later on, but it's one of those points that kind of stuck in my head. It was a 7 by 7 foot, 3-inch thick slab of sandstone that they were going to use for the floor of the basement.
That's not suspicious at all.
No, I know, right?
It sounds normal. It's fine.
That's normal. It's fine.
I feel like, I don't know if anybody listens to the Dollop, but it's like a guy telling another guy a story about history, and he has no idea what it is, and it's never a good thing. It's never a good thing. Oh, that sounds normal. That's fine.
That's fine.
This will turn out great.
So they commence building a house about 100 feet away from the Osage Trail, on a hill, so they can see travelers coming down the trail. They finish the house in early 1871. They go into Ottawa to the train station, and they bring back 2 women. So there are 4 of them, and they open in this house a dry goods grocery/inn. And they have a piece of canvas, the canvas that they used for their covered wagon or their wagon, dividing the living space from the business end of the home. So now we have 4 Benders, and they are, or what they told people, John Sr., who spoke very little English. The people that spoke of him later said that he had kind of like an ape-like appearance. John Jr., who everyone kind of thought was feeble-minded, and apparently ended everything he said with an unnerving giggle.
Oh, no.
The older woman is only ever referred to as Ma. Like, no one ever finds out her name, and she speaks no English.
This is like Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Just drink your tea, child. Just drink your tea.
Yes. Just wait. And then lastly, we have Kate, who is unlike any other member of her family. She is charming, she is outgoing, she is soon inundated with suitors. People remark that she moves with a tiger-like grace. Kate, and this is an era when basically everyone had to work to bring money into the homestead. For a while, Kate worked as a waitress in one of the local cafes, but that didn't last very long. This is also the era of spiritualism, brought on by the Fox sisters.
What's that rapping?
So Kate also made it known that she was a medium and a healer. She would do palmistry, numerology, and readings, and she had several clients that would come to her. And as I said, several suitors. Suitors that would be willing to go into town to sell, to get supplies for them as they needed, or sell items that were left behind by guests that didn't have cash to pay for the supplies they needed. Their basic setup was you could purchase supplies, tobacco, cloth, ammunition, and you could stay there for the night, and you would get a meal cooked by Ma and a straw mat on the floor to sleep in during the night. So everyone in the area kind of thinks they're a little strange, but no one really thinks too much about it. And then in 1871, Mr. John Williams was found in a local creek, Drum Creek. The back of his skull was crushed, probably with a hammer, and his throat was reputed to be slit from ear to ear. In February of 1872, 2 more men were found on the prairie with the same wounds. One of the strange things about the body found at Drum Creek, Mr. Jones, there were no clues except for a set of axle marks or wagon marks where the rear axle was slightly wider than the front axle. That was the only incriminating thing. Kind of for the next 2 to 3 years, people just continue to disappear in this area, which was and was not normal.
Right.
People could just travel, just never be heard from again. During the winter and spring of 1872, there was a Ben Brown, William McCourtney, Johnny Boyle. All these men who were going out to form homesteads had a considerable amount of cash on them. Henry Mackenzie had about $2,000. William had about $2,600. Around $2,000 a lot of these people had.
That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
Back then.
Just never to be heard from again. Henry Mackenzie, the last one I mentioned, he was cousin to the township officer, Mr. Leroy Dick. In 1873, letters start coming into Leroy Dick about missing relatives from back east, because people haven't heard anything for a while, including the missing cousin. So people are starting to notice that people are disappearing. In March of 1873, Mr. George Lochner and his daughter went missing.
Wait, so how long has passed before people have started to realize that people are going
About a
missing?
year and a half, it looks like.
That's pretty quick for not having telephones or a police department, or did they?
No, well, there were marshals and there were town officers and general posses and things, but there was a lot of letter writing in the day.
Yeah.
So people would have expected to hear something.
Right.
Fairly
Fairly
from loved
quickly.
ones. The last gentleman and his daughter had been sold a wagon and a horse team by the local doctor, Dr. William York. William York is from Independence, the town kind of up the trail. He is traveling a little further ahead, and he hears tell of the wagon and team that he had sold being abandoned on the side of the road.
Mm.
So he goes out in search of the father and daughter to find out what happened to them. The reason they were moving west was because the mother had recently died, so they were leaving to make a new start. The father, I think, was taking the daughter to her grandparents in Iowa. So Dr. York goes out looking for them, any sign of what happened, and he goes missing. April 8th of 1873, at the annual school board meeting, they conduct their business. Everyone in the town is there, and the discussion quickly leads to all of the missing people. What are we going to do? What's going to happen? They discuss that they're going to form a posse and start looking for an outpost of bandits, or if any of the local tribes are attacking, or what's going on. But nothing really comes of it. They decide they're going to do something and then not do anything for a couple more months. About mid-April of that year, Dr. York's brother, Colonel Alexander York, who was in the Civil War, decides he's going to come into the area and he's going to start looking for his brother. And he starts looking in earnest. He's looking along the whole Osage Trail. He has his own posse. In one of the towns that he has stayed in, he has been advised to stop at the Bender Inn. It's a good place to stay for the night. About April 14th is when Colonel York makes his stop at the Benders. When asked, Kate responds, yes, the doctor was here, but he left the next morning. Nothing all that unusual about it. Kate, as a spiritualist, offers to go into a trance to contact her spirit medium on the other side to see if he can find out where Dr. York is. But since there are so many unbelievers in the crowd, and because she hasn't reached her full potential as a medium, it might take her a while, so she advises them to come back in the morning. This seems agreeable to Colonel York. The posse comes back in the morning, and they question the Benders about the body of William Jones found in Drum Creek. John Jr. tells them this story about how he was ambushed a couple of months back at the same place. He takes them to Drum Creek, shows them what happened, and apparently, by all accounts, no one really believed him. But the posse leaves, nothing happens. But apparently a fair number of the posse wanted to arrest the Benders right then and there. On April 29th, 1873, A wagon team is found with bullet holes and blood on the dashboard, a wooden grocery sign in the back guarded by a snarling dog. The horses had been there for a while because they had been gnawing on the side of the wagon, and the rear wheel axle was wider than the front axle. May 1st, Billy Toole, a neighbor of the Benders, was driving his cattle in the area, and he finds that the cattle appear to be starving. They're not where they're supposed to be. Some of the chickens have died. He goes up and looks in the house and finds that it's been completely abandoned. This is when shit gets real. Leroy Dick and his posse of men, they go into the house to see what they can find. There's no sign of anyone. They find some things that you probably wouldn't leave behind if you were planning to leave. They find this 8-day clock that was from the old country, the German Bible that the old man was seen reading sitting outside the house watching for guests coming in.
So like family heirlooms, really, that you wouldn't...
And one of the York brothers, an Edward York, finds his brother William York's glasses in the house. They also find underneath the wood stove 3 hammers, a 6-pound handmade one-handed sledgehammer, a shoe hammer, and a common 3-inch claw hammer. They also find where the dining room was, they find a trap door, and when they pull it up, they are fronted by the stench of rotting blood. They go down into, well, they don't go down. They get the posse to move the house off of the foundation.
Oh my gosh.
Because would you go down into a blood-smelling pit? Like,
I wonder if they all argued about who was going to go first, and then they were like, no, this will be easier.
You found it, you're going.
I'm not going down there. They find that that 7x7, 3-inch thick slab has been just soaked with blood, and blood has filled the dirt underneath it. As they're continuing to look around the property, as the sun is beginning to set, they start to see depressions in certain places around the property where there are clearly... just wait. The first one they dig up, they find the body of Dr. York. They also find all of the people that had gone missing in that first year. Ben Brown, William McCartney, Johnny Boyle was found in the well. George Lochner and his daughter were found in the same grave, and the way that it was found, it looks as though the daughter was buried alive.
Oh my God.
That's like one of the worst ways to die ever.
They also found the bodies of an unknown man and an unknown woman and several body parts, not necessarily associated with any of these. So there's really no knowing how many victims that the Benders had caught. As I was going through this kind of struck me as being like a reverse home invasion. Like they bring someone into their home, and then they have this systematic way of, which I'll get to.
That's almost like creepier, because people are going into it thinking like they have refuge, and that's where you're most vulnerable. Yeah. And I'm sure that I know I've read short stories or something where that has been the case, where like some traveler finds an inn and then this family like kills them, takes their money and stuff.
Like you said, it is kind of reminiscent of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like this family. After this time, there is kind of this uproar against German immigrants because the Benders were allegedly German immigrants. Rudolf Bachmann, the guy who ran the trading post, who first told John and Sr. about the plots, they tried to lynch him 4 times until like prevailing cooler minds in the party stopped them. There were several arrests made by local Germans. Whole families were arrested for allegedly being in cahoots with the Benders. The Roach family, the Tykes family, the Coles. A Reverend King, who was, his interaction with them was he rebuked Kate publicly for being a spiritualist. And they thought for some reason he was in cahoots with them as well.
That whole like witch argument. It's just people get scared and they go crazy.
There were other things that I had read that they had found. Apparently they had found strange symbols carved in the walls and the floor, but I only found that in one location, so I don't know how reputable that is. Like, it's one of those things that happened so long ago, records were so poorly kept that much of the story has become story. Yeah. Like word of mouth. Like it's hard to separate what really happened versus what people are saying. After this time, All of these people that were arrested, former clients, were arrested. After all these people were arrested, they were all freed because there was no connection. The family basically kept to themselves. After it had come out what the vendors had been doing, stories start to come out about all these near misses that people just had not been talking about.
Oh, jeez.
There was a local woman apparently who had been going to Kate for a healing. She was getting upset about how long the healing was taking. Kate tried to talk her into staying the night, but she agreed only to stay for a seance. As the seance was going on, apparently the family began to speak and intone in some kind of gibberish.
Oh, no.
And the woman ran out of the house. Another local woman, while the gibberish was being intoned, they were passing around a club, a knife, and a pistol. And when the weapons came out, that's when the lady left. She spent the night hiding in their fields while the two men were trying to chase her down on horseback.
Oh, my God.
Another local woman had gone there for a seance, and Kate and John Jr. started to apparently draw human figures on the walls and then to plunge knives into them. And Kate had informed her that the spirits were commanding her to kill. So that woman runs out to safety. There was a Mr. Pickering who had been passing through the area. He was offered the guest seat, but didn't want to, who was directly behind the canvas dividing the two levels of the house, the business and the home. He didn't want to sit in the guest seat because he noticed a strange grease spot directly behind him. He tried to sit in another seat, and Kate scolded him and yelled at him. She pulls out a knife. He runs away.
Why didn't he leave in the first place when he noticed the stain on the canvas? I wouldn't have been like, I'll just sit somewhere else. I would have been like, no, this is weird. I'm just going to go.
Well, it doesn't say that it was blood. It just says it was some kind of grease spot.
Okay, but like, what was he thinking? Like, oh, there's a grease spot right behind my feet.
Here's what happens is that, and I think people go, I don't want to be rude. And they've said that, they've said that a lot in some podcasts, that it's like you see something and you go, and your lizard brain goes, no. But then your social part, the social part of you goes, but if it's nothing and I'm being rude, which it most likely is, then that's almost as bad, which is awful. We shouldn't think that way, but I think that, like, sometimes we just do.
Well, if all this stuff was happening to these people, like, who were being chased through the fields at night, like, why didn't they mention it to anybody? Why not go into town and be like, hey, these people chased me around?
I was wondering if it was because of their involvement with spiritualism. Are people against it at this time, or is it okay?
I think there are some people that are against it. I think there were always people that were against it.
They were going to Kate for healings and seances and stuff like that, and they didn't want to be like, oh, so what were you doing there? And they'd have to go, well, it was this witchy thing, and then they might be like, well, that was your fault then, or something. I don't know.
And the family had a reputation for being just strange and unusual. There was another woman, a Mrs. Fitz, who, she was a guest, had stayed there for the night, and she noticed some kind of movement happening behind the canvas, to which Kate said, now. And before anything could happen, she fled out of the house.
Okay. Like, why isn't anyone saying anything?
Well, these people weren't local people. These were people that were traveling through the area.
Oh, right.
Stayed the
so
night,
who do you go to,
and then
right?
I think they probably just got out of the area altogether. The last near miss that they have was a father...
Ponziglione?
Yeah, it looked incredibly Italian to me.
So Italian.
It's so Italian. Like, he goes in and he immediately has this... Something is not right about this family. Something is not right going on here. From go. When he sits down to the meal, he notices that Kate and John Sr. are discussing something in low tones. John Sr. picks up a 6-pound sledgehammer and walks behind the canvas. To which the father responds, I have to go check my horse. And then rides off in the night. So there are people that, like, this isn't right. I'm leaving now. So there is hope, I guess.
So they're like standing behind this canvas and people are sitting down to dinner unwittingly?
So the MO that they worked out from all of these near misses and these stories was the traveler would be invited to a meal cooked by Ma. He would be seated in the seat of honor with his back directly to his or her back directly to the canvas. Kate would give the signal and Pa would smash them in the back of the head with a 6-pound sledgehammer. They would be lowered into the trapdoor underneath the house, and then, and I haven't worked out why this is, but every version of the story that I hear, it's always Kate that goes down into the trapdoor and slits their throat.
Oh, it's so Sweeney Todd. Dude, yeah.
Like, I don't know why it is that they decide that it seems like she was the one who was kind of running the house. But, so the question that has always kind of struck me about this was, why did they do it?
It wasn't for money entirely.
Like they were taking the money, but it feels like there was definitely something else they were getting out of it.
Well, it sounds like Kate was the evil mastermind behind all of it. I mean, the rest of the family sounds like they're not brilliant. So, I don't know, maybe she was kind of
but still willing to go.
Pulling those strings, you know?
A bunch of people being in the grip of, like, a total nutcase, and you spend enough time with someone who's unhinged from reality and completely crazy, and pretty soon the stuff they're saying starts to sound pretty reasonable, especially if she believes in spiritualism and who knows what she, if the spirits trying her to do it or what. If they really believe that she could communicate with people on the other side, I could see where she could convince them that this is what they were supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So as the story continues to get picked apart, questions started occurring like, were these people even a family?
Okay.
Like, were Ma and Pa married? Like, there are variations in the story that say John Jr. and Kate were brother and sister, and there are variations that say John Jr. and Kate were husband and wife. Like, no one even knows and understands the relationship working in this family.
Well, yeah, because I think in the beginning you said, right, so these two men come down the trail, and that's John Sr. and John Jr., and then they set up this house, and then they go into town and they come back with these two women?
They go farther up the trail to the get to the train station, then bring back the two women from a nearby train station. So
okay.
So further up north or east, that's where the Ma and Kate were.
They could have been doing this somewhere else before that if they'd known each other.
And they just disappeared.
No one knows where they went.
No one knows where they went.
I mean, in all likelihood, if they lived and they remained united, they didn't stop doing it.
So there's
until they got. I mean, no one got caught either, right? No, there was no.
Well, and there's discussion as to whether or not, like, some of the epilogue to this is there are two stories that are told. They escaped. They escaped together. They split up, either old and young, men or women. Or one of the stories that was going around the most was that they were, because there was that wagon that was found with the bloodstains and the bullet holes. So there is a story that there was a group of vigilantes that they never made it out of the county. That there was a group of vigilantes that tracked them down and shot them or burned them alive or hung them and hid their bodies in the creek. There's even there's an apocryphal story about Laurel Ingalls' father was in on the posse.
What?
Yeah.
That's a little house book you didn't read.
Like, it turns out, like, when they went back and that's a story that she would tell, that her dad would say, mentioning the Bloody Benders, like, they're never going to find them. They're not going to do it again. But looking back, they were nowhere. The Ingalls family was nowhere in the area near the Bloody Benders when it was happening or when they disappeared. So there are all these stories about Kate being seen, or John Jr. being seen, or John Sr. being seen, like, all over the nation. Later on, the final epilogue is in 1888 in Kansas. There's a woman, Frances McCann, who befriends a woman who has been abandoned by her husband. She gets deathly sick, and this woman tells Frances that she was Kate Bender and that her mother was Ma. When she recovers, she goes up north in search of her mother. Frances wants to find out what happened to Kate, because one of the things that Kate told her, Frances McCann had been an orphan all of her life, and this Kate told her in a spiritual trance that the reason she was an orphan was because her parents were killed by the Bloody Benders. So Frances McCann wants to find out if this really is Kate and what happened to them ultimately. She goes up into Michigan to find Ma. She finds Kate and Ma. They're now going by the name of Elmira Griffith. Elmira, who has apparently had several husbands, had several children, many of her children, and helped her in her nefarious crimes. There's lots of jail time. Frances goes back to Cherryvale, gets Leroy Dick, the town officer, brings them up. Both Kate and Ma are in jail in Niles, Michigan. Both had accused the other of stealing from each other. Leroy gets to the prison, sees the women, says, "Yep, that's them." Takes them back to Cherryvale. In November of 1889, a trial is held in Kansas. There are 16 citizens who had interactions with the Benders. 7 say, "Yep, that's them." 6 say, "No, it is not them. There is no way," and 3 are undecided. In 1890, there's a trial about to happen, but it never comes about. The charges are dropped. The woman that had been accused of being Ma was apparently serving a jail sentence during the 1870s. She couldn't have done it, and she also at this point speaks perfect accentless English, when Ma couldn't speak any English or didn't in the presence of anyone. Shortly after all the murders, the house, as you were saying earlier about people gawking, while the posse was there, all the people from the local towns had come out, and they ripped the house apart for the souvenirs. So apparently, around 1890, there is nothing left of it, and it is reputed that the corn comes up blood red.
Ooh.
The thing that I love about this, and this is one of those stories that melds from true crime into legend, and there's no way of picking it apart. Like, there's no way of knowing why they did it. There's no way of knowing where they went to. It's kind of worked its way into all these pop culture references. The first time I heard about them, I was reading the book, Neil Gaiman book, American Gods.
Oh, really?
And there's the dark god Chernabog, and while they're traveling around the nation, Chernabog makes them stop, and they don't ever say the name of the family. Chernabog makes them stop in a field outside Cherryvale.
Oh, I just got chills.
Shadow asks Mr. Wednesday, "Why are we here?" And he says, "There was a family here that sacrificed to him with hammers."
Oh my gosh.
And when Chernabog comes back, he's evil. He's a dark god, so he is rejuvenated being in the field. So like this family kind of keeps popping up because, like Jack the Ripper, they were never really caught.
Right. Right.
Clearly they're dead now. I hope.
Yeah, well, like, what if one of them reproduced? Like, what if Kate reproduced? And, like, someone was saying, I don't know who was telling me, they said that H.H. Holmes had a grandson, or a great-grandson, and the great-grandson just found out that he was related to H.H. Holmes. And he found some papers in the attic or something. And I was like, did H.H. Holmes even have kids? And it turns out when he died, he had 3 wives. So it's very possible that he had children. Like,
oh, no, he definitely had 2 children, I think. I looked it up. I
okay.
For a dinner.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah. And I looked it up. He either had 2 or 3 children, but yeah.
Oh, that would be so messed up to find that out. Okay, well,
this is so good, and I actually had heard of it because of Little House on the Prairie.
Really?
When I started getting into it, I was like, this sounds so familiar. And it is in one of the Little House books that she, like, because they actually, in one of them, they're actually not that far from there, but she remembers going to the, like, where it had happened or something. I can't remember.
Wow.
And apparently...
Who knows? I mean, I think she was really young, so who knows? It was just like a story that she was told, or if they really went, or what, but...
Apparently, like the Axe Murders, Cherryvale now has, like, Bender days, so it's also become this huge... Maybe
there's no drinking on those days.
Oh, God.
Oh, my God.
And there's a museum where they have the hammers.
They have... Okay, so, like... This story, so does it lean more towards reality than fiction? Because those are actually the hammers?
Yeah.
Those are the hammers.
Those are the hammers, and these are people that died. You know, there are parts of the story that towards the fringe where it's hard to pick up.
But the core is there.
The core is there.
Very
like,
plausible.
there's like some of the stories were like a local woman. Like, there's no, like, the women with the speaking gibberish, like, it was just a local woman. There's no name associated to that. So there are aspects of it that I think are conflated or half remembered or
Or, some people could be saying that for attention. Like, I escaped from them.
Yeah.
And
Right, which is kind of what I was thinking with some of those stories of, like, I was being chased around the field, but then, I didn't actually go tell anybody about it. Like, it just comes across as, like, were you really being chased around the field? Or do you just want in on it?
Yeah.
Or did you just run out and you added that part of the story?
Actually, now that I remember, that did happen to me.
I mean, it would have been easy enough to get enough details that you could make it up. People want to be in on those kind of fantastical events.
Yeah.
I wonder if Texas Chainsaw was in any way inspired by this. I don't remember hearing anything about it.
Texas Chainsaw was supposed to be inspired by Ed Gein, but the stories are so different that, like, I have trouble besides the
wearing faces.
Yeah, wearing faces element connecting with that.
Well, and I know when they were advertising that movie, they advertised it as a true story.
And that was because of Ed Gein, I believe.
Yeah, they were trying to convince everybody it happened.
Well, there's a house in Texas because one of my friends who's from Texas, there's a house that's supposedly the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house. Sorry, my cat's climbing all over everything. It's supposedly the Texas Chainsaw Massacre house. But even around there, he's like, nobody really believes it. It's just kind of like a fun story.
Yeah, I'm gonna look that up. About the origins of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just because that's really interesting. Maybe see if I can link some articles on WordPress or whatever.
Well, I know there's still people who believe that it was a true story. I know before I saw it, I thought I was. God, that was a long time ago, but I thought it was a true story. I know there's a lot of people who still think that it is. That reminded me so much of that family in Texas Chainsaw. I couldn't help but think about them the whole time.
I got the same vibe from it. They have their own little social code there, and when you walk into their house, you're completely under their rules and their ideology and stuff, and like whatever crazy hallucinations they're having.
Well, and even like with Paw hitting him over the head with the sledgehammer, all I can think of is that part where they're trying to get him to hit the girl in the head with the hammer.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah,
he can't do it because he's, like, dying, but...
Oh, so the link between these two cases, so far as I can see, is that, like, what's with the blunt force trauma?
Yeah.
It's like every single victim has been killed by bludgeoning.
Isn't that... it's a slower death, isn't it? It'd be
I don't know. It depends on where you hit them and how hard you hit them, I guess.
It seems like with this, the thing that killed them was the throat being cut.
Yeah.
Oh, it was. Okay.
I'm sure that there were probably some that died from the...
So he would just, like, stun them with a hammer.
And I think there was still, like, it seemed like a lot of the heads were bashed in pretty severely. Like, they would have died.
Right.
With just the hammer blow, but...
It's just really it's just, like, really...
Yeah. That definitely sounds sacrificial. Like she was definitely trying to do something down there.
Oh, man. All right, well, that cheerfully ends part 1 of this episode. And this will be released on Friday, the 31st. And the second part will be released Monday. Second part we'll be talking about... Well, I'm not going to tell you. Did I already say something? I think I already did.
I was doing a murder because I would have.
Okay. Well, we'll be doing Rachel's murder on Monday. And also talking about Gillian Flynn's novel Dark Places.
Which is scarily reminiscent of your story, too.
It is very reminiscent of the Villisca Ax Murders.
It's kind of creepy.
Okay, well, we will see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.